All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring the incredibly glossy surface of corporate marketing, and more importantly, the hidden reality lurking right beneath it. We live in an era where a company's brand is basically its most valuable asset, right? But as we're going to see, the desperate desire to look good is increasingly clashing with the actual responsibility to do good. Think about it. We see the corporate tweets celebrating International Women's Day, or we happily hunt for those little fair trade stickers on our groceries. But how often do those progressive claims actually match up with reality? It really forces us to ask a tough question. Are we supporting genuine impact, or are we just buying into a really well-funded illusion? Well, that brings us to a growing phenomenon known as social washing. Simply put, this is a deceptive tactic. It's when companies dramatically overstate their social benefits without providing any verifiable actions to back them up. They want all the PR glory of championing labor standards, diversity, equity, inclusion, and human rights, but they want it while keeping their core and often problematic business operations completely untouched. Now, to really understand social washing, it helps to look at its older, more famous sibling, greenwashing. While greenwashing focuses on environmental impact and relies on hard quantitative metrics, like, actually tracking tons of carbon emissions, social washing is entirely people-focused. It relies on qualitative data, things like assessing labor standards or community investment. Because social risk is so much harder to measure with just a simple number, it creates this massive gray area for companies to exploit. And get this, the overlap between the two practices is just staggering. According to research from RepRisk, nearly 1 in 3 public companies linked to greenwashing are also associated with social washing. It's wild. They're literally using the exact same deceptive playbook, symbolic management, selective disclosure, empty policies. They're just applying it to different pillars of corporate responsibility. Let's move into Section 1, the fair trade facade, and see how this actually plays out in the real world, starting with the agricultural supply chain down in Mexico. So, you're walking down the aisles of a supermarket, and you're bound to see labels from organizations like Fair Trade USA and the Equitable Food Initiative. They promise ethical consumption, right? Farm worker-assured produce? But recent deep dive interviews with about 200 workers by the Corporate Accountability Lab revealed a much, much darker reality. Behind those glossy, responsibly grown stickers, workers are actually facing severe wage theft, harassment, and even conditions of forced labor where their identity documents are just withheld. You're probably wondering, wait, how on earth do these farms pass their ethical audits? Well, the reality of the auditing process is pretty shocking. Social auditors typically perform these focus group-style interviews with workers right in front of the Human Resources Department. As this powerful quote from a farm worker highlights, workers are literally coached to lie to the auditors just so the plantation can maintain its certification. Ultimately, what we're looking at here is the certification illusion. These schemes claim to empower workers through things like joint worker management committees. But the harsh reality? These certifications often just become tools of management repression. Crazy enough, the private labor standards set by these groups are sometimes actually lower than the prevailing national labor laws. So corporations easily clear these incredibly weak standards, get their shiny ethical stamp of approval, and well-meaning consumers unknowingly buy right into the illusion. Let's look at Section 2, Brand Activism Gone Wrong. What happens when companies trip over themselves trying to appease everyone on social media and in the political sphere? A prime and honestly brilliant example of exposing social washing in real time was the gender pay gap bot on Twitter. When companies rushed to post all these celebratory tweets about female empowerment for International Women's Day, this bot automatically replied to them by publishing the firm's actual legally mandated gender pay gap data. It instantly highlighted the hypocrisy of their brand activism, and let me tell you, it prompted a lot of embarrassed companies to quickly hit delete on their original tweets. Companies employ a whole variety of tactics to project this image of care and sustainability. Whether it's selective disclosure, like maybe hiding a massive data breach while loudly claiming to champion privacy, or relying on those dubious certifications, or using token philanthropy to mask systemic issues, the goal is always the same. They are aiming to achieve a competitive edge and win your loyalty without actually doing any of the difficult, necessary groundwork. We can clearly see the danger of corporate political action in Disney's recent legislative flip-flopping in Florida. Initially, they stayed completely silent on a controversial education bill, which sparked massive outrage from their own employees and the LGBTQ+ community. Trying to reverse course, Disney then pledged a $5 million donation. But critics immediately pointed out that 5 million is largely tokenistic compared to their roughly $2 billion net income. And to make matters worse for them, taking a stance then caused severe retaliation from conservative lawmakers. It perfectly illustrates the massive reputational and business risks of trying to play both sides. And we see this widespread vulnerability across so many industries. Coca-Cola faced rotating boycotts from both sides of the political aisle after withholding and then later denouncing Georgia voting laws. Meanwhile, Starbucks actively promotes a highly progressive, liberal-leaning image, but simultaneously they're battling serious union-busting allegations from their own employees online. Making shallow, unsubstantiated claims leaves a company totally exposed to reputational damage from literally all sides of a debate. Which brings us to Section 3, the data measurement problem. Let's dive into why measuring social risk is so tough and why companies continually manage to get away with this. As we touched on earlier, the climate benchmark is pretty well established. We have standardized, quantitative metrics to track a carbon footprint. The social hurdle, however, is a much steeper climb. Measuring social risk relies on inconsistent, self-reported, and super localized data. Add in the fact that collecting demographic data on employees is often legally restricted by privacy laws, and benchmarking social good becomes incredibly difficult to verify. It's like trying to measure the wind with a ruler. But the academic community is definitely paying attention. Researchers, like the folks writing in the Journal of Organizational Behavior Education, are actively studying this exact phenomenon. They're looking at historical cases of corporate social irresponsibility at massive global companies like Nestlé. They want to evaluate whether subsequent social responsibility initiatives are driving genuine structural change or if they are simply managing public impressions. And man, this data gap is especially brutal for small and medium enterprises. Think about the resource gap here. A small business might have literally one solo HR person managing tasks, but enterprise buyers expect dedicated ESG teams. Small businesses rely heavily on qualitative narratives, while global buyers demand quantitative data via APIs and deep-tier traceability across the whole supply chain. It creates an expectation gap that can unfairly penalize smaller, genuinely ethical businesses that simply lack the massive budget for complex corporate reporting. So, what is the fix? Section 4, moving to radical evidence. How do stakeholders actually fight back and force a shift from cheap lip service to real accountability? The answer lies in demanding what industry experts call radical evidence. It requires a strictly data-centric approach. We absolutely have to stop accepting self-reported sustainability claims and replace them with rigorous, independent third-party audits. Companies must implement deep-tiered traceability, meaning they track conditions not just at their direct supplier, but all the way down the chain. And they need to utilize modern tools, like AI-powered anomaly detection, to spot the discrepancies between their public claims and their actual operational reality. For businesses that actually want to do this right, there is a strict 5-step roadmap for genuine social impact reporting. You have to start by defining clear, measurable KPIs and collecting baseline data before you make any grand claims. From there, actively engage stakeholders and local communities. Bring in those independent third parties to verify the data. And, this is the most important part, report on the actual outcomes generated, not just the inputs. It's about the real-world change created, not just the size of the donation check you wrote. Ultimately, the power rests in the hands of informed stakeholders. It is entirely up to us, consumers, employees, and investors, to demand the data that actually proves a company's claims. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought as we wrap up today's explainer. The next time you evaluate a brand, a purchase, or an investment, are you going to demand radical evidence, or will you just settle for a well-crafted illusion? Thanks so much for joining me, and keep asking the tough questions.